The Russia-Ukraine war has reached day 1432 with fighting continuing on multiple fronts. In Kiev, thousands of buildings remain without heating after missile and drone strikes on energy infrastructures, while Ukraine reports an intensified aerial campaign over the past week. Moscow, meanwhile, says Ukrainian attacks have damaged infrastructure in Russia's Belgorod region. On the diplomatic track, President Zelensky says a U.S. security guarantees document is now ready and that recent trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi showed limited progress. International voices continue urging restraint as winter conditions worsen civilian hardships. While dialogue continues, both the military pressure and geopolitical uncertainty remain firmly in place. We've been joined by two guests to discuss this in detail. Let me introduce them to you one by one. Hart Armbruster, former U.S. ambassador, joins us from New York. Excellency, thank you very much to have joined us. Our second guest is Dr. Roxolana Zigon. She's a Russian geopolitical expert, joins us from Moscow. Thank you very much, Roxolana, to have joined us as well. We'll begin with you, Tom. In early January, leaders from more than 30 Western countries gathered in Paris, France, to sketch out a new framework of security guarantees for Ukraine that would take effect if a ceasefire with Russia were to be agreed. Now, the coalition of the willing have issued declarations of intent, including plans for a United States-led ceasefire monitoring mechanism and the possible deployment of multinational forces led by France and the UK to ensure Ukraine's defense and deter future aggression. How optimistic are you as far as this measure is concerned? Could these fall short of expectations of the people in Ukraine, in the region?
I think that the negotiations, the peace negotiations, reflect very much the war itself. The war has been slow, it's been grinding, it's been very incremental progress on both sides. The peace process is the same way. Certainly there is progress in seeing that these security guarantees that the United States is offering have been accepted by Zelensky. I think that's positive. It's positive in a way, I suppose, that Russia has also clarified that right now the sticking point is territory, in particular the Donbass. So we're moving slowly, and the talks were described as constructive. But the mood in Kyiv apparently is still rather grim and determined, and we're now in the 1,423rd day of this war. So I think optimism is probably not the right word, but these building blocks steadily, hopefully, are going to bring us to a place where peace can be achieved. The other really positive thing is that the three parties, the United States, Ukraine, and Russia, are at the table. And that's a prerequisite for any peace plan, any progress. But you're right that Europe has been involved and is very important, but the final say is really going to have to be the Ukrainians.
All right, I understand, and of course, let's see how things move along. There's a new, set of talks that are going to be held very, very soon. Roxolana, with heavy strikes continuing on both sides, how realistic is a near-term ceasefire while military operations remain intense?
I actually believe that what has happened in Abu Dhabi is not about geography or even geopolitics. It's somehow a failure of the multilateral diplomatic efforts. But the good news is that during this conflict, we have seen that was the first attempt, diplomatic attempt, that was reached mostly by the American side, and we have expressed, the Russian side has expressed its gratitude to Donald Trump administration, to all his efforts. However, we have seen that there is no will or inclination from the side of the European Union, even by registering the creation of coalition of willing. I think we need to actually talk about creation of coalition of action. So what we have seen in Abu Dhabi is somehow an amplified or a kind of vulgar form of hard power, under coverage of diplomatic efforts, because there is a strong contradiction at the very core of these diplomatic talks. So the last thing that the Russian side would be willing to support is stabbing with the knives in our backs, because when you have peace talks, it's absolutely unacceptable to have the scenario of attacking like we have seen in Belgorod, the really massive attack of the missiles.
All right. Excellency Thomas, I'd like to understand what impact is the sustained targeting of the energy infrastructure having on civilian resilience and humanitarian conditions, especially during this winter season?
It's a brutal winter, and we're experiencing it here in the United States as well. But this week, Russia launched some 1,700 drones, 1,380 guided aerial bombs, and 69 missiles. So I think a good step in confidence building and in establishing trust would be to de-escalate and lower that sort of attack. But many people are without heat in Ukraine right now, without energy, and certainly that's difficult for morale. But the Ukrainians have proven that they can withstand quite a lot, and Russia also has shown that it has quite a long patience for this war. It's able to inflict a lot of pain, but it's also able to withstand a lot of pain, which is again why I say we can't be too optimistic at this point. It's very slow progress, but at least it's building towards something. And what we need is a breakthrough. I mean, if President Trump would travel to Kyiv, maybe we would see some kind of movement, because it's also very easy for the world to be sidetracked by, not sidetracked so much as the attention diverted to other pressing matters. You know, Israel, Venezuela, Greenland. There are a lot of things at play, and this war has been operating sometimes in the background. So it's important to find ways to make a bigger step, and a concession by Russia by de-escalating during this winter would be a positive step.
All right. Let's see if it happens. Let's hope it happens. Roxolana, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that an agreement on U.S. security guarantees for his country is 100% ready to be signed after talks with Russia in Abu Dhabi. How significant are the proposed U.S. security guarantees in shaping Ukraine's negotiating position and long-term stability?
Frankly speaking, I'm afraid that Vladimir Zelensky has been exercising skills of misreading, a lot of documents, and we have been just observing his behavior, his political misbehavior. He's a kind of enfant terrible that everyone is tired of, frankly speaking, and knowing that he's constantly backed up by the negative, aggressive approach from the side of the UK and other Western countries. Unfortunately, it creates really strong obstacle and pebbles, the diplomatic efforts between Moscow and Washington. We have to be really accurate in giving a configuration or describing the current configuration of diplomatic process. I would rather say that there is an activism in the field of Russia and US dialogue, and much less we should put bitcoins, on accounts of Mr. Vladimir Zelensky. It's a good news, of course. I will highlight that those 20 points, of security guarantees have been finally adopted or finally understood by Vladimir Zelensky. It's a good, actually, news. But let's see how the things will be proceeded, because we must make the step number 2. So reach phase number 2 within 1 week and upcoming weeks, and move away from a demagogue approach. That's the most important thing, to keep a focus on practical, pragmatic approach.
Excellency Thomas, do the reported gains in these trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi suggest some kind of meaningful momentum for the next round of talks, or are core disagreements still blocking progress?
It is some real progress, I think. Again, the fact that they're all sitting down at a table together is very positive. We have to remember the history a little bit too. The Budapest Memorandum, signed by the US, UK, Russia, and Ukraine, back when Ukraine decided to give up its nuclear missiles, was abrogated by Russia. Russia broke the UN Charter and invaded. So we have to keep that in mind, that this trust building starts from a basis of mistrust and violence. This is not an easy thing to repair. And as I said, I think Russia could show some good faith by ratcheting down the attacks, especially during this cold winter. But we'll see. Next Sunday, they'll get together again. The EU is also tightening up things. The French Navy has detained the second Shadow Fleet Russian oil tanker. So there is more pressure, and I think more incentive for both sides to find a way forward. But it's difficult, and we can just hope the negotiators find some common ground.
All right, Roxolana, what risks do cross-border attacks such as those reported in Russia's Belgorod region pose for broader regional escalation?
I would actually like to prolong the stance that my colleague has actually exposed about trust revival. I think that if we talk about a positive, constructive continuation of the diplomatic efforts, we have to actually respect and preserve the parity. So if the US, EU side and Ukrainian side is willing de-escalation process, of course, we also expect that during the peace talks, we will not actually experience attacks on our regions as well. So I think it's both sides path. It's really important to not counter just one side, but also to be very accurate and delicate on multilateral aspect and scope.
All right. Excellency Thomas, how might the involvement, in your point of view, of external actors, that also includes North Korea, and sanctions enforcement actions in Europe influence the trajectory of this conflict?
Yeah. The final decision maker on whether we have a peace agreement, I think, still rests with Ukraine. But there is scope for other actors, both on the positive and negative side. You mentioned North Korea. Certainly that adds fuel to the fire. But maybe there's scope for the United Nations as well. The UN has been sidelined in this conflict to a large degree, and the United Nations is still a body where peace building and peacekeeping is part of their DNA, part of what the UN was founded for. So I wouldn't discount the idea that perhaps some solutions can be worked out through the United Nations. Certainly the US has a strong role, the EU has a strong role, and I know that Ukraine is now talking to their Baltic neighbors as well for support. So this does involve the whole world, or at least a very large part of the world. And those other players may play a pivotal role, but at the end of the day, it's going to be Ukraine that's going to have to make the final decision.
All right. I'd like a very short answer to my last question to you, Roxolana, and that concerns diplomatic channels. Do you feel they still remain credible under the current circumstances if, for example, key parties publicly reject engagement with certain international actors or institutions?
I think that we're experiencing a really pivotal moment in the global diplomacy. Recently, we have heard a lot of talks during Davos Forum about diplomatic peace talks and creation of the peace board. And unfortunately, we are all experiencing a grave deterioration of diplomacy and global governance. So on all parts in the world. And it's really difficult to claim whose fault is that, So every single region and every single state is fighting, for its sovereignty and its leadership and its values, etc. So somehow it's a global reshuffle. So it's a turbulent moment full of uncertainty. And definitely we need to find unconventional pathways and instruments, how to return trust to the very essence of diplomacy and rule of diplomats, in the interregnum between war and peace, because the world is so complex that there is no simple solution. And there is no solution that can be satisfied by a certain institutional effort. So we have to actually create a kind of new narrative, a new way of approach, a new philosophy, instead of actually supporting that kind of demagogical, attitude, especially towards Ukraine. Because I'm sure that Ukraine is not the last conflict that we're going to experience within the upcoming decades.
Okay, thank you very much to both of my guests. First of all, Excellency Thomas Hart Armbruster, former US Ambassador, joining us from New York, and of course also Dr. Roxolana Zigon, Russian geopolitical expert, joining us from Moscow. We wanted both sides of the story, and you got it right here on Beyond Borders.